Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Last session of the day of a two-day conference. I hope you had a great time, and thanks for hanging in there with us. We saved the best for last. This is going to be the best session of the conference. We have some superstar...
No pressure.
We have superstar panelists here who have started companies, started multiple companies, and invest and get more companies going, VCs here. So we've got some great panelists. A few things to start. There are two microphones out here, and we want you to ask questions throughout. So I'm going to start with a few questions. I'll be looking at the mics to see if you're up there to ask questions, and we want to do that throughout the session. Okay, so don't make me ask all the questions. All right? Let me ask a couple questions right now. How many of you are not from Silicon Valley? Oh, awesome. How many of you are not from the United States? Awesome. That's great. Okay, great. First, let me introduce our panelists. Paul Buchheit, the inventor of Gmail, left Google and started FriendFeed. FriendFeed was acquired by Facebook. He stayed at Facebook for a while, then left, and now he's a venture capitalist at Y Combinator, one of the premier startup incubators in Silicon Valley. Joe Kraus, founder of Excite, one of the very first search engine portals on the web. Very successful. Merged with At Home, so it became Excite at Home. Later, the founder of JotSpot, really cool startup that was acquired by Google. Stayed with Google for several years and now is a venture capitalist at Google Ventures. And to my right here, Seth Pribach. He's the founder of Scavenger. He'll tell you a little bit more about that, but it's a really cool game that you can play based on location and go around and find things like a scavenger hunt. It's a really cool game. And Scavenger is a portfolio company of Google Ventures. So he's in the family. So this session is about how to take an idea from a nights and weekends kind of project that you're hacking on to a funded startup. And how do you get there? All three of these guys have done it several times. So I think that's the first question. Tell us how you did that. How did you go from idea stage to hacking something to finding another co-founder to getting some angel investment to getting venture capital? Let's start with Seth.
Cool. Just want to make sure I'm doing this right. Can everyone hear me okay? Cool. I started Scavenger when I was a freshman at Princeton and started working on it there, doing math and computer science. And basically the lineage of the idea was about taking game mechanics, moving them into the real world, trying to play a game literally everywhere, and taking it from that to actually being something that looked a bit more like a company was sort of a messy process. I brought it to one of my computer science professors, this guy Adam Finkelstein, and said, hey, I have this cool idea. There's a Princeton business plan competition coming up. Will you help me put together just enough to make it look like the product sort of works? And we did that, and we hacked together a few scripts in Python, and it was literally running on a server underneath my bed in my dorm room, which if we had ever vacuumed, the circuit would have blown and the whole thing would have gone down. But ended up winning the business plan competition, and that was sort of a key turning point for us. And then sort of made the leap of faith and decided to drop out of school, because that's what all the cool kids were doing at that point, and I figured I should follow along. I think that's probably the best short answer I have to it, that I found a couple friends at college. I found one professor, got into a business plan competition, which gave us some credibility, and then sort of took a leap of faith to jump into one of the incubator programs. We went with Dream Ventures and sort of started it from there.
Great. Joe?
Yeah, for me, I'll talk about my first company, which was Excite back a while ago now, 1993. I started it right out of college. We did the route where we borrowed money from we had 6 co-founders. We borrowed money from our parents. We borrowed $15,000 total and basically set up shop in our garage. And the kind of two things that I would basically say, one is that persistence played a huge role for us in moving from nights and weekends to a funded company, in that we just never gave up trying to get money. And the second is that opportunity creates opportunities in ways that are hard to predict. Our funding cycle literally went like this. I got a book when I graduated from my then college girlfriend, which was by a guy named Bob Cringely, who still writes an online column, and it was called Accidental Empires, and it was about a gossip history of Silicon Valley. In the book, it said, tips for entrepreneurs, call me, I'm a cheap date. I call him, we go out to lunch. He's interested in what we're doing. He says, I want to join the company. I said, great. I don't know anything at this point. I'm brand new, and I thought, oh, this author wants to join our company. We've made it. He eventually doesn't join, but he introduces us to his parent company, which was IDG, a big publishing company at the time. They gave us our first $100,000 contract back in 1994 to put all their archives online. One of the people I met there said, if you do a good job, we'll introduce you to our board. And so we did a good job, and they introduced us to their board, and one of their board members happened to be a venture capitalist named Steve Coit out in Boston at Charles River Ventures. Steve said, I'm kind of interested in what you guys are doing, but I need a West Coast partner. So he introduced us to a guy named Jeff Yang, who was then at IVP, now at Redpoint. Jeff said, yeah, I don't really know what to do with you, but he introduced us to Vinod Khosla. We met with Vinod, and his first question, unlike everybody else's, which was, how are you going to make money? His first question was, does your technology scale? We said, we don't know. We can't afford a hard drive big enough to test. He buys us, right then, 5 minutes later, a $10,000 hard drive, which, by the way, in 1994 was 10 gigs. And basically, that led to us getting a $3 million financing from Kleiner Perkins, in that case without a business plan. And the reason I tell that story is, you could not predict from a book that I received from my college girlfriend to a $3 million financing from Kleiner Perkins how that chain of events would have happened. But one thing led to another. Opportunities created opportunities in ways I couldn't predict, and the second is we were persistent. To me, it's the number one characteristic of amazing entrepreneurs is they persist. So that'd be my nights and weekends transition.
All right, so that's a great answer. My story is a little different. It makes noise. All right. So I was very interested in startups when I moved out here, but I didn't know anything about them or anything like that. So I did the only thing I could. And again, the idea being you don't really know where the path leads, I decided I would simply join a startup and then hopefully learn in that way. And so luckily, the startup I joined was Google. So it's just a simple matter of...
Good choosing.
Joining Google in 1999.
Nice dart.
Yeah. And, I was there for a long time, obviously, and a lot longer than I expected. I never thought Google would really last. It seemed like a...
Flash in the pan.
Yeah. I mean, with Alta Vista there, it's hard to see how Google could really make it.
I was at Alta Vista at that same time.
Yeah.
And look where I ended up.
Alta Vista was huge.
I got you all beat there. I had the opportunity to buy Google, and I failed to do so. So how about that? How's that for egg in the face?
Anyway, so that was obviously a great experience for me, and it achieved my goal of learning something about startups and also just meeting a lot of great people. So when sometime after I left FriendFeed, was getting together with friends from Google, first Sanjeev Singh, who was the second person from Gmail. We started talking about startup ideas and also other people who we might be interested in, having come on board with a startup as well. And so we kept an eye on who else might be coming out of Google because there were lots of good people at Google. And ultimately ended up talking with Brett Taylor and Jim Norris, who were also interested in doing a startup. And the four of us together finally formed FriendFeed sometime later. And so, at that point, I think our story differs quite a bit from most startups because of our history, which is a little bit unusual. Brett had more or less started Google Maps, and Sanjeev and I had done Gmail. So we had an advantage over most startups in terms of being able to raise money and such. We actually tried to avoid raising money. And but still, just that idea of never knowing where the road leads, and you always just kind of have to go forward. And certainly the deal with selling the company to Facebook was sort of a surprise because they were always trying to buy us, and we always said no, never. And then one day we sold, kind of by surprise. And again, where I am now in terms of Y Combinator just kind of happened spontaneously out of that same process of just meeting people, talking to people. In the case of YC, I've actually been involved since about 2006. Initially just investing in the companies, and every batch I would invest in more and more companies. And at some point I was already investing in so many of the companies, it just made sense for me to join full time, and that's how I got to where I am now.
So, Paul, you had 4 founders in FriendFeed.
Right.
Joe, you had 6 co-founders in Excite. Seth, you did it by yourself. Why don't you have a co-founder?
No one liked me. It was well, maybe, but I'm not sure that was totally relevant. For me, Scavenger is by far the most successful and most interesting startup that I've done, but I had done 2 previous ones. Giftopedia I'd founded when I was much younger, and it failed gloriously. The thing just totally blew up. But I'd sort of been used to doing things by myself on that, and I think a lot of the stories you hear are about founders looking for founding partners, and that's one very successful model, and there's obviously a huge amount of data, a huge amount of stories to showcase the success on that. For myself personally, I sort of wanted to get it to a stage where I knew, at least what I was doing, where I had some level of proof of concept, and then went the route of looking for really solid advisors and looking to build out a team very quickly. So by the time I started building out a team, we had, I knew what the product was going to be. I knew at least sort of what it looked like. It's obviously evolved a tremendous amount and continues to evolve. But for me, the founding portion was something that I'm much more comfortable doing myself, and then realizing what I'm very weak at. Sales was a big thing I was weak at. Marketing was a big thing I was weak at, and finding the right people to help me do that. But at a slightly later stage than looking for a founding partner.
Actually, for anybody who is out there starting companies, I talked to somebody about this last night. The data actually suggests and supports the notion that there is a positive increase in successful outcome as you add numbers of co-founders up till about 4. There's just no data past 4. So you are more likely to succeed as you add co-founders to your business. I don't know nobody knows exactly why, but there is that positive correlation.
We've certainly noticed this at Y Combinator, because we have, at this point, I don't know, 300 or 400 startups, and two or three co-founders seems to be the sweet spot. One is just very difficult a lot of times, because ultimately startups end up having really difficult times, and it's easier if you're not all alone when things are awful. And we're not really sure why going up 4, 5, 6 is bad, but it our sort of theory is that it's just sort of an indication that there's almost like a little bit of fear in the group. That obviously, like now I'm talking about both of our companies, which worked out okay, but we've seen that sometimes when there's that many people, it kind of indicates that none of them is quite as committed. They don't have what it takes to make it with 2 or 3, and so they kind of get more and more people almost out of fear.
Paul, I believe Y Combinator doesn't accept companies of one.
Oh,
founder.
no, we absolutely do. Yeah, in fact, probably one of the most successful Y Combinator companies of all time, which is Dropbox, was originally a single founder. And then he found a co-founder. So he was accepted as a single founder, and then he found a co-founder later on. But we have several single founders in every group.
Joe, as a venture capitalist, when you look at investments, do you like it when there are co-founders or several co-founders, or how do you look at that?
Well, obviously it depends on stage, but if we're talking about something early stage, seed or A round, the things that we definitely look for and that we have in a pretty broad analysis of a lot of companies and data have found is, one is, yes, there's a positive correlation between number of co-founders. Second is, have you worked together in the past is really important as a kind of predictive indicator of likely success. And that's just primarily like, have you gone to battle together before? Do you like each other at the end of it? Can you communicate honestly with one another? Do you resolve disagreements without just striking the middle ground and having the easy answer? But oftentimes somebody winning an argument is actually more important than trying to kind of thread the middle. So having worked together. And then lastly, the thing that is positively correlated to success is this is obvious, but like, do you actually know the domain you're pursuing? Startup founders who do their second startup are actually no more likely to succeed in their second startup if they're in a brand new domain. So, like for me, I did a consumer internet startup in Excite. When I went and did JotSpot, which was really focused on small to mid-sized business, by the numbers, I was at no greater an advantage having done a startup before, mainly because your go-to-market strategy is so much different. The way you sell, the way you market, how you understand your customers is so much different. But bottom line, in early stage companies, the stuff that we like to see, obviously, if you've done it before, that's great. Multiple co-founders is good. Having worked together in the past and hopefully in a domain that you're operating in a domain you understand and have some deep expertise in. Those are all kind of obvious things, but some of the stuff that we certainly look for.
I look at co-founders as validation, right? If there are several co-founders, that means that more than one crazy person agreed that this is a great thing to do.
Yeah, you cast a good reality distortion field over a large number of people. That can be helpful.
Right, because there's lots of crazy people, myself included, who have ideas every day. But I think the validation of an idea is when you can convince someone else to drop what they're doing and join you in your idea. If you can get 2 or 3 people to do that, then that's pretty good validation that you might be onto something. And if you can't convince 2 or 3 people to drop what they're doing and join you, you should think really hard about what you're doing. Now, Seth and others are exceptions to that, but as an investor, I weight that pretty heavily. So we have questions here, so let's start over here.
Quick question. So any ballpark information as far as does adding co-founders increase your chances by 10%, 500%? Also, you said there's no data past 4. Is there any drop-off, sort of leveling off? So adding 1 co-founder quintuples your chances, but adding the 4th one is only 10% increase.
Yeah, I don't know the data explicitly. This is actually public research that's been done, academic research that's been done on this particular point. I don't know the name of the paper, but and I don't know how to get you the name of the paper. Maybe out of the Google Ventures Twitter account, we can tweet that particular paper that details the answers to that. And the reason there's nothing above 4 is there's just not many companies that start with 5 co-founders or 6 or whatever.
Hi. Today, what do you think is more important, traction or product?
Oh, in my opinion, traction for sure. I mean, look, there's always the internal debate in a company. What matters more? Does the team matter most? Does the product matter most? Does the market matter most? And oftentimes, I think most people understand that it's an interplay of the 3. And that oftentimes it's heavily dependent upon what stage you're actually making that evaluation. So a company that's doing $200 million in revenue and $50 million of free cash flow, well, their market matters a lot because it's an ongoing concern, and you want to know how much expansion there's going to be into the company. How much expansion of the revenue of the market over the company there can be. Way dialed back to the early stage. What's really interesting is anybody here read a book called The Checklist Manifesto? No, I don't recommend it, actually. But because I can summarize it in a word, like a few sentences, which is people who are really expert at something are great at telling other people how to do it and really bad at following their own advice. So the classic example here is medical doctors who are, let's say you're a pulmonologist. I can tell Don here, here's how I screen for whether somebody has lung cancer. Then when you watch what that doctor actually does, nothing related to what they actually told Don to do. And that's why pilots have checklists, right? So there's just no notion of expertise bias. Well, the thing here is that if you actually ask and survey wide swaths of venture capitalists, especially in the early stages, what's the most important thing? In the very early stages, they'll all say team. When you watch what they spend their time doing due diligence on, they do diligence on the product and the market. And so there's a mismatch between what people say is important and what they actually do. So the question as an investor is, how do you create a system or a bias towards doing what you know to be important? And so, sorry, long-winded answer, but in my opinion, in the early stage, it, for me at least, is all team.
Thank you. Okay.
So this is mostly, I think, an ethical question. How do you know when your product is too big for your current company? Like you talked about Gmail specifically. That was something. How did you know that was right for Google versus striking it out on your own? Whereas with FriendFeed, that was something, that social networking has always been kind of something Google might do. How did you have the clarity to know that that was right to do on your own?
I think doing Gmail as a startup would have been a lot harder. The resources required, I mean, just in terms of all the hardware, everything else, not to mention just the brand value of Google. You know, are you going to trust your email to some company you've never heard of? I think that's less likely. By the time we launched Gmail, you know, Google was pretty well known and pretty well respected, and people trusted it. People trusted switching over. If it was, you know, some friend feed mail, you might be like, well, I'll give it a few years, right? And obviously, I mean, there's counterexamples. Hotmail was a startup, but at the time they didn't really have any competition. So I think it would have been a lot harder to do that as a startup because it benefited a lot from Google's brand and technology and everything else. Other startups, I think having an attachment to a big company like Google could even be a hindrance. You know, again, maybe, I don't know, I'm not going to go into the Google social experimentation, but so certainly you can see where people might actually be more comfortable thinking this is like a new product, and the ability to move very quickly and take unusual directions, and not be hindered by a lot of the big company apparatus. And Facebook, you know, might be a good example of that. You know, it's written in PHP, which would never have been allowed at Google. But, you know, it's very successful. But I think if it were subjected to a big company process, they wouldn't have been able to make the big bets, take the big gambles, you know, anger millions of people, and whatever else it took for them to become number one.
Thanks.
Over here.
Hi. Can you give your views on working with archangels versus working with early stage VCs?
Archangel, like super angels, is that the? You know, I don't know. I think the lines have gotten pretty blurred. I don't know that there's any simple answer. It really depends on how much money you're needing to raise. You know, if you're going to do a large Series A or something like that, you're probably going to end up at a standard VC. Also, in terms of how much you're going to have to give up. If you do a Series A, typically you're going to give a board seat, or maybe 2 board seats. You're going to give away, you know, 20 to 30% of your company. But if you're doing a seed round with regular angels or super angels, you might be, you know, giving away much less. You might only sell off 5 or 10% of your company. But typically, you're getting a lot less money. It probably won't last you until profitability, or even, you know, maybe more than 6 to 12 months.
I personally view it as, who do you fundamentally believe can help you build your business? Like, it comes down to your choice of who you want to help fund you should, in my opinion, not be based at all on firm, on position, on whether they fit, you know, super angel, early stage VC. It's fundamentally about, do you have a good relationship with that person? And I always use the caller ID test, which is, if that person calls you and you look at the caller ID, are you excited to pick up the phone, or are you like, oh, crap? And the investments that I've always kicked myself for fail the caller ID test, but where I get greedy. I'm like, oh, it's going to be an awesome business. And then invariably, you know, stuff changes, but I'm still getting the calls. And, you know, so it really is fundamentally, do you believe that you've got the people that can help you, give you advice, and kind of steer you right, more than, you know, one bucket or another?
So Seth, you raised angel capital money and venture capital money. So you've gone through both processes. What kind of decision did you go through in choosing your investors, or did you just take any money that would come, or how did you go through that?
Sure. So from our perspective, we went through an incubator, Dream It Ventures, which was based in Philadelphia, is now based in Philadelphia and New York, and they're sort of, you know, they're structured like a VC, but they're really an angel. You know, it's a tiny round. They give you $35K. They take 6%, sort of the standard model. You sleep on the floor, eat ramen noodles, build things as fast as you possibly can. And then we basically had a choice to, you know, sort of what to figure out after that. I decided I wasn't going back to school at that point. I mean, we looked at the angel versus VC sort of dichotomy, and our initial reaction was to go with an angel round. We were looking to raise about $750,000, and we figured, you know, that's probably more of an angel-sized thing than a VC thing. But we went out and we talked to a bunch of VCs, and what we found was, you know, we went sort of the unusual route. I think at this point a lot of people are going the super angel route. We ended up going with Highland Capital, which is a large VC. They've got $2 or $3 billion under management, and they agreed to do a tiny round. You know, they're not used to writing checks for that small amount of money. They've actually gotten into it a little bit more now. But we figured if a company that, or a venture firm that's used to investing in businesses that are much, much bigger was willing to spend their time with us, even if they weren't putting that much money to work, that was probably a very good bet for us. And so we ended up going with them, and they've since participated in our 2 follow-on rounds and have been hugely helpful. We've now raised about $20 million from Google Ventures and also Balderton Capital. And from our perspective, again, Scavenger is the only serious company that I've really done. But my recommendation would be if you can get a large VC to put a small amount of money in you, the real value you're getting is the time, and so you can get a lot of leverage for that if they'll do terms that are reasonably equivalent to what an angel might do.
Hello. Question across the board. I was curious if you could speak a bit about what has kept you motivated over the years, both before and after your success, other than massive amounts of money.
When I did my second startup, almost every employee that I was trying to hire asked me this question. And the truth doesn't sound, it is the truth, it's not satisfying for most people, but it is what it is. Which is, I love the personal relationships that you form in a startup when you get a group of people trying to do the impossible. It is the closest. I'm now married with 3 kids, and I don't get to spend a lot of time with people that aren't in my family. And the kind of closest to that collegiate experience where you're spending a ton of time with people, there's kind of this crucible moment. That's what I get out of startups. And so all of my closest relationships really come from the companies that I've done, because you go through these experiences where literally you don't have, we had this at Excite, you literally don't have the next payroll in the bank and you're trying to figure out what to do. You go through these ups, the celebratory experiences where something great happened and where something bad, horrible happens. And so for me, at least, it's the relationships that you form when you try to do these things.
How about you, Paul?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that's actually one of the things that, in my mind, is a big differentiator from startups versus some other environments, is the extent to which you're really close to the team and you're kind of choosing the people you're around. Especially if you've started the company, you literally choose the people you're working with. But also, there's just the creative aspect of launching new things all the time. And I mean, I don't know, that's just fun for some people. And it's certainly something that I think enjoyed most just at FriendFeed, is every day I'd go in, I'd write something new and I'd launch it. And just being able to get things out there that quickly, to have an idea and move from idea to implementation to having it out to the world and people telling me that they hate it or they love it or whatever in such a short period is it's kind of intoxicating. It's just a lot more fun than most of the things that people. It's more fun than, I don't know, whatever it is people pay to have fun. It's more fun than most vacations, to actually build things and launch them. And that's a big part. Obviously, there's the flip side that, then at 4 a.m. you get called because a server is broken and you've got to wake up and fix it. I didn't really care for that part so much. So there's a balance, but even what I'm doing now, I get to be involved in the creative side of things because people come to me with problems, or we're looking at a product and you can kind of explore solutions, and then next time I talk to the people a week later, they've tried it out and told me that it didn't work or it did work or whatever, but it gets that same creative cycle of exploring the world and trying out new ideas.
So I've got a totally unconventional and probably not likely to be popular response to this one, but Scavenger is a company all about game mechanics, and we've certainly we've still got a lot of work to do, but we've certainly done well. We're 2 years in, and we raised our last round north of 100 million, so we're doing well. But I very explicitly try and manage my own motivation using mechanics, and the way I do it is lack of alternatives. Realistically, you take out everything else that could possibly make you excited or successful or happy, and you replace that with what you're doing at your company. And if you've got,
I love you.
If you've got, you're not going to like this one, and it's not popular, and it's probably not recommended if you want to be happy. But it's recommended if you want to be, if you want to build your company to be, as big as you can possibly make it. I built my whole incentive structure so that I don't draw salary. I don't have a super active social life. I left Princeton. I decided I was going to do scavenger, and that was it. And it's sort of the thing: if you really want your troops to fight hard, you burn the ships, and you've got nowhere to go. And if you build yourself to have only that is the thing you are doing, then you're absolutely motivated to do it because there's nothing else. And it sounds a little stark, and it sounds sort of a little cruel and almost masochistic, but it's really not. It's a very almost Zen-like state where you wake up in the morning and you know that there's absolutely nothing else in your life that you have to do except build a company. And I'm in a weird state, right? I sleep at the office. I don't have an apartment. I outsource laundry to my parents. Like, it's a wonderful, blessed, bizarre life. But but if you can do that, if you can convince the office to bring in breakfast and lunch and dinner so you don't have to worry about making food, and you can remove all alternatives and everything else you have to focus on, then you will keep yourself motivated on what you're building. And that, not going to be a super popular one, not going to get in a book anywhere, but it definitely works.
Great, thank you for taking the time to talk with us.
Motivation is incredibly important in starting a company. It is everything. Motivation and competition. If you remember, when you were kids and you played sports, team sports, and the adrenaline rush that you get from a band of brothers out there trying to defeat the enemy and just practicing so hard and getting so committed to doing something, and then the thrill of victory when you actually win. Well, when you're adults, you don't have an opportunity to do that. The sports are gone. And for me, startups are like adult sports. You build a team, you go against the competition, you wake up every morning and you can't wait to get there and to beat the competition. And there's nothing else like it. Once it's in your blood, you can't get away from it. Question over here.
When you find a company that you're looking to invest in, how do you come up with a number of what you think that company is worth? Do you listen to the seller, or do you come in with a number? And is it 10 times sales, 1 time sales, valued on EBITDA?
It's obviously heavily dependent upon stage. So again, if you're investing in a late stage company with serious public comparables, it's a much easier valuation exercise. You might value it on a multiple of free cash flow. You might value it on a multiple of EBITDA. You would value it relative to those things, relative to its growth rate. But most investing by VCs is not that style of investing. Most investment by VCs is investing at a much earlier stage with much less perfect information. Actually, I think it is, in my opinion at least, more art than science, the valuation game. And it is subject hugely to human dynamics. So like I'm a big poker player. I love playing poker. And it's clear that obviously competitive dynamics increase your valuation pretty dramatically. That sadly, I think most venture investors are subject to a huge set of herd behavior and what I would call FOMO, fear of missing out. So I think if you want to play the game against the investor, you've got to realize that investors have for some reason, a much greater fear of missing out on a great deal than a worry about striking out on a deal that they see in front of them. And that's very anti-Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett's view is there's no called strikes in investing, only hit pitches that you think you can knock out of the park. But it's very hard in a kind of a competitive environment for most investors to stay true to that. So, and then the last thing I would say is that oftentimes investors, through, I don't know who's read Predictably Irrational, but the notion of an anchor price, oftentimes, oddly, conversations around valuations revolve around what the entrepreneur said that they wanted instead of an independent, like, what do we think it's worth? And it takes discipline inside the investing rooms to actually create to create a valuation from scratch without being anchored by what the entrepreneur said. So kind of flip that around. I would, if I were you, I'd mention a price.
Definitely.
The second thing is just recognize the psychology and how competition plays into it. Now, you got to be careful on the game in the sense that what you don't over-optimize. If you find somebody you really want to work with, then it's really not worth jerking around, because a 10% premium relative to the chance of losing the person that you think can make the difference isn't worth it to the long run of the business. So hopefully some of that was helpful.
So my friend always asks me to come up with a business plan, and he'll give it to some of his investor friends and see if anything would happen. But say you don't know how to make a business plan, and also that your idea is kind of out there and there's no really statistics or numbers to back your idea up. How would you go about getting your idea funded without a business plan, if it's possible?
So, no company that YC funds ever has a business plan. We basically, again, the team is a big part of it, and then just look at the idea, and specifically, does the team understand the idea? But at an early stage for kind of high-tech startups, there usually aren't really any numbers that you can look at. You can't say this is going to be our revenue in year 5. When people do that, it's all fiction. And some people do that because they think it's an obligation. But when you look at it, there's no one could have ever predicted what Google's revenue was going to be at whatever year, right? So that kind of any time spent on that sort of thing, that makes sense for a sandwich shop or something like that, where the business is kind of predictable. If you're starting some Facebook or something, there's no way you can predict any of those numbers. And so we ultimately just invest in people at an early stage, which isn't to say that the idea doesn't matter, because if someone comes to you with an idea that seems really, really bad, that kind of reflects on the person. Or it might just be a really brilliant idea, which is always the intriguing thing with bad ideas, is that they're either bad or brilliant. And that's where you want to talk to the team and find out, have they thought through kind of the obvious flaws. If you ask them, well, what about, if your plan is to give away free gold bars, you say, where do you get the money to get the free gold bars? And think, oh, I didn't get that. That would be a bad sign. But, maybe they have a machine that makes gold. And you think, okay, this we can work with. So it really, at the early stage, you don't worry about business plans. Just build a product. That's really the most compelling thing, is if you can actually demonstrate that you have something that is useful and that people like. So don't spend any time on that. Just build something, get users, get traction if that's possible, and that will make you stand out.
To jump in on that, we wrote a business plan for the business plan competition and never used it again. Highland never asked for it. Google Ventures never asked for it. Boulderton never asked for it. I still have it, and it's really good looking and sounds super professional and is totally wrong. But I would say you should never write a business plan except for a business plan competition, because winning those is useful. But they're the only ones who really care.
Good. Over here.
Hi. I'm interested in the field of intellectual property. What's your view of funding? The part of intellectual property, patents, trademarks, all this stuff. Should I work into it? Do you consider it as a plus in considering funding?
There's differing views on this. My own personal view is no. Here's why. I think that it's really only valuable to any company that would acquire you, because small companies have no ability to prosecute their patents. Most of the time you're walking in with patent applications and you've got multi-years before it grants. You don't even know if the company's going to survive to that stage. And then lastly, most patents aren't actually foundational or fundamental in some way. They're incremental. And so they're usually used for defense more than offense. Somebody sues you, you basically countersue, you've got kind of competing claims, you do a free cross-license. They're rarely used to effectively affect the outcomes of competitors or other companies as a startup. Now, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, somebody big buys you, and you have something foundational, that will improve your valuation. But I think the chances, for the most part, are slim relative to the ability of actually making a business of substance. So it's not a high focus. There are certain areas where it is more of a focus, but in kind of traditional, certainly in kind of consumer internet businesses, no.
Over here.
My question is especially for Paul and Joe. I'm the founder of a small enterprise software company. We have a lot of traction in a small niche, and we are going after a very large market that's growing really fast. When you look at a company like that, what are some things that turn you on, and what are some things that turn you off?
Well, at the stage that I invest is usually like the very early stage. And so, again, it comes down to the team. And if the team believes in the idea and the team seems good, we just go with it. Because the assumption is you know better than we do. That said, enterprise sales is notoriously difficult. But I think the question you're asking might be a little later stage and more to Joe's.
Yeah, it's tough at that level of, at that level of pitch. It's hard to give you kind of specific advice. But my sense is where I would quickly dive in that conversation is just, one, I'd want to understand the dynamics of the market that you're selling into today. How are you selling into it? Is it direct sales? Is it indirect? Is it over the phone? Is it field sales? How do you compensate those people? What's the title of the people that you're selling to? And then I would want to understand, is that pattern relevant to the pattern into this larger market, or is it a new pattern? And I would want to also understand, is this going to require a heavy lift with regard to upgrading the team? So suddenly the people that were really good at this niche market, well, are they the right people, or are we going to have to hire a bunch of new people to attack this bigger market? So that would be the line of questioning that I would start going down at the level of detail that you've given me.
Hi, I have a two-part question. It seems like the team is very important, and it also seems like a lot of us use Google App Engine where the hardware has become less important, and it seems like startups are actually getting cheaper to start at this point, easier to take a risk. So I'd like your views on outsourcing. Basically, now that we don't have to pay the money on hardware, I'd rather invest in local talent and keep the team together. And I'm just wondering how you guys feel about the cost of startups and how outsourcing affects that or shouldn't affect it.
Outsourcing of what?
Coding in particular.
Well, I mean, if you're a technology company and you outsource the coding, you're basically outsourcing the thing that you do to a large extent.
Bar machine.
Yeah.
But you see a lot where the CTO will be someone local, and then they'll outsource the dirty work. And yeah, I mean, I don't agree with that. I'm just wondering.
No, I mean, it's not like an ethical thing. It's just that, sometimes that works, but I haven't really seen a lot of examples of that. I've seen a lot of people try, and it can sometimes work if you're really on the ball. But the fact is that it's very hard to get really top quality developers, even when you're carefully screening them. You go through a long interview process, and you're managing them locally. When you're just picking up people off of a website, I think the quality that you're going to get just isn't as high. Now, if the actual technology that you're building is something very basic and that's not at all fundamental, you just need to customize your WordPress template or something, I think that can work fine. But if you're building something where technology is a core part of the business, I think that you're going to run into a lot of trouble.
As a general rule, I don't like it at all early stage. There are always exceptions to the rule. In particular, if this entrepreneur has a long-standing previous working relationship with this group that happens to be offshore and they've developed multiple products together, really the thing you're dealing with in early stages is you want a mind meld between the team. And you want very high bandwidth, low latency communications between the team. That is just hard to achieve telephonically or over VC or any of these things where you've just got time and distance that no matter how good the technology may be today, it is really, really hard to get that kind of communication going. So again, the only exception I will see is like somebody's worked with this team for 10 years and they've developed multiple products together, then I'd consider it. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it at all.
Yeah, to add to that point, actually, of the team being together, at Google, if something became really important, we would actually put all the people in the same room. Because actually having people be, in separate rooms, it turned out to be a huge disadvantage in communication. And that's because they're like 20 feet apart. Right? If you put them on the opposite side of the planet, it's a whole other game, right? There's latency with time zone. It just mucks up the whole communication.
I agree. Thanks.
This is a little orthogonal, perhaps, but I'd be very interested to hear from each of you that aside from your own companies, who do you think are the really hot startups to be working for today?
You're talking to people who start companies. They don't work for other people. They aren't going to do that.
I guess I'm saying the ones that look like they have, big potential or really solid or whatever. A lot of buzz.
So to throw in the plug, if you weren't going to apply to Scavenger, jobs at scavenger.com, then I think I think the companies that are really interesting are probably the ones you hear about a lot. But companies like Square that are doing things in mobile payments, we're a location-based company. I think that mobile payments are going to be one of the things that tie social to making it actually work in offline commerce. And so any company in that space, and Square is sort of a leader there, I think would be fascinating. And I don't know if you guys have any others.
It's funny. So thank you, Seth, for giving me like 30 seconds to think. Because, again, as a VC, you're spending most of your time selecting what you hope are the best companies and then trying to assist them to make them successful. So mentioning something outside the portfolio actually takes a lot of like synapses firing. But there's a company downstairs that I admire from afar. They've raised their money. It's a mobile gaming company. I do some gaming investing. It's called Pocket Gems, and I just think they're on fire. I think they're great, and that category monetizes well. So that's a company that I happen to like. I don't know whether anybody's ever heard of them, but they're quite successful.
So I think anything to do with mobile, location, social, or games, those 4 things.
I get that pitch a lot. There's the first slide. It's mobile, social, gaming, location.
Yeah. So if you can come up with an idea that integrates mobile, social, and games, go for it.
And colors.
Colors, yeah, that too. Okay. Another question, or are you?
Unless the last panelist had any ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I could name off the obvious companies depending on what stage. You've got Facebook and Twitter and Foursquare. Those are all obviously really hot companies. But if you want earlier stage things, I don't spend that much time thinking about the early stage companies that aren't YC. I mentioned Dropbox earlier. I think they're going to be huge, and as well as quite a few of our other companies. But I don't have any great examples that come to mind for you, unfortunately.
Okay, as someone who views himself as a young entrepreneur and has many, many ideas every week at least, what are some tips that you guys have for like self-regulating your ideas and junking the ones that, because often I'll be very idealistic and optimistic about things just because I'm in the moment of thinking about the idea. So what are some tips about weeding out just completely obviously bad ones?
I can answer this one, at least first, because people come to me all the time and ask me exactly that question. And I tell them it's sort of like, if it's the only thing you can think of, if you wake up every morning and that's all you can think about, then that's the one to go with. If you have 10 ideas and you think they're all kind of pretty good, but not sure, or I'm not going to leave my existing job to go do this, forget it. Don't do it. It's got to be an idea that you just cannot stop thinking about, and you have to do it. When you have that feeling, that's the one.
I would actually argue, I don't mean to sound rude, that the profile of the personality you're talking about that you have is not complete as a successful entrepreneur. It's not the idea factory. It's pairing yourself with somebody that's really good at focusing, and getting a co-founder is incredibly important for your personality type. Most of the people that I know that are idea factories are not the guys that are great at starting and executing on companies, because they can't stay focused on making an idea happen. And again, persistence is one of those key things that makes entrepreneurs successful, because, look, startups go through deserts, big deserts, where nothing feels repeatable and easy, and like maybe you're getting a little bit of sales, but it doesn't feel like you've figured out the real formula. Well, an idea person like yourself immediately jumps to, what other ideas might we do? And sometimes that's good, but most of the time it's actually bad. Most of the time, persistence does carry the day with a combination of exploring. And it's that balance that is really important, and the art of it. And so I would say to you, get a co-founder that's different than you, that can help kind of shape and pare down those ideas and kind of tamp down the factory.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's excellent.
Just wondering, like, how do you guys see about health, just like your own health in terms of doing startups? Do you sacrifice your health to I mean, like...
Yeah. No, this is a huge deal. I mean, I don't mean to jump into it already, but I'll tell a personal story. And I tell this only because I regret it. I was a competitive skier in college. I had a huge ski accident, fell 300 feet down a chute through rocks and was lucky to be alive. And I blew up my knee, and I had reconstructive knee surgery. And I had the surgery a week before we started pitching JotSpot on our VC roadshow, essentially, where we're going to the roadshow. And instead of delaying it, I did all the pitches, and we got the company going, and we kind of went, and I put all of my health stuff on hold. It took me 7 years as a result to recover from this fully. And so I've made a commitment, like, never again am I doing that. And it's really tough because for me, what motivates me is my commitment to my team when I'm doing these startups. And so I did the thing I shouldn't have done. I kind of sacrificed my own health in that particular case because I felt so obligated to show up for the team. And that was just a bad choice.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a very short-term optimization to sacrifice your health because you have to recognize all of your abilities, your mental capacity, your emotional capacity to handle things is going to come from your health. So if you're extremely unhealthy, I don't think you're going to be able to persevere, which, as Joe pointed out, is like kind of the key thing you need to do. Are you going to be able to make it through that desert if you're half dead? And it's bad for the team too, I think, because then you're setting a bad example for everyone else, where you're kind of implicitly telling them that they should be also sacrificing their health, right? So, and one of the few pieces of advice we give the YC companies for the summer is basically, or not few pieces of advice, few activities they're allowed to do. It's like you just spend all of your time working. I forgot what the other thing is, and then go outside, get exercise. Basically, it's crucial. I think if you're indoors the whole time, you're just going to go insane and feel terrible.
Yeah, I buy into the physical activity thing a ton. I mean, I would recommend if you're doing a startup, put yourself on a running regimen or swimming or biking or whatever, partially to stay healthy, but partially because physical activity is an awesome time to be thinking about things or not thinking about anything and letting your mind reset, but also expanding that to your team. At Scavenger, we have team hikes. We're doing a 200-mile running race next weekend with 6 of us, where we're all hopping in a van and you sort of relay from a mountain to the beach, 200 miles in 24 hours. And if you can keep the entire team active and healthy, it's no surprise, and there's a lot of data out there to show that people who are active and healthy are happier and more productive. And you want people to be, to be healthy, you want them to be focused and dedicated, but definitely healthy, and physical activity is a great way to help make that happen.
Well, 2 good friends of mine in college, we created a product line for next-gen disc golfing accessories, and we actually won first place in the business concept contest. So my question is, who should we talk to get funding? Like, what are good companies to, like you, like who are good people to talk to? I mean, we're trying to get funding to take to the next step: manufacturing, prototyping, shipping, all that.
One of the things you'll find, at least at the firm level, is firms like to invest, the old adage, like invest in what you know. And so if you look through all these funds, all the angels, most of them have big portfolio pages. I would spend some time looking through and seeing if you see anything that at least is approximately similar. Like, for example, Google Ventures has nothing in something that involves retail sales or something that involves broadly speaking, something non-technical. We're probably not a good fit in that particular case because you're gonna be swimming heavily uphill, and VCs, like it or not, are pattern matchers based upon the limited amount of time they have, and like, is this a pattern that feels familiar and where I can apply learnings from one experience to another to help accelerate the progress of the company. And so for me, if I were you, I would basically spend time looking through the portfolio pages of a lot of different funders and narrow it down to approaching those that basically have something that's analogous in some way.
The other thing you might try is just building the business on your own. I mean, I don't know too much about the disc golf space, but I can imagine that it would be a lot easier to raise funding if you already had an established online business where you've demonstrated, just running it out of your apartment or something, that you have a market.
Yeah, we've made a prototype of the backpack we've taken out to market and stuff, and we've been estimated about $50,000 to complete, the first 1,000 backpacks after shipment. And I mean, we can't really do that on our own. So that
this is actually,
you might be able to do it with friends and whatnot, right?
Not in college.
Okay.
Well, I would think there's a broader point in here, which I feel like is oftentimes we get pitches for businesses that are interesting lifestyle businesses where people, I think, it would make a great lifestyle business, but probably isn't a venture-backed business. Where a venture-backed business, again, you're going to want to see a return on your money and a high likelihood that there's a multitude of buyers at almost every stage of the company.
We know there is.
But the thing is, the question is, you always have to also believe that the business has a chance of being huge. And so a lot of times we run into companies that are great businesses if the person's motivation wasn't getting on the front page of TechCrunch. And instead, the motivation was, I want to draw as large a salary as I possibly can and just have a business that throws off a ton of cash, but I don't need to be on the cover of TechCrunch. I just want to have a great business. And so it's oftentimes, there's some counseling around like, look, I like your business. It's just not the right one to invest in, but make it a great lifestyle business, and I think you'll be generating a bunch of cash.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes left, so we're going into lightning round now. That means the questions are like 15 seconds and the answers are like 45 seconds.
Only one person answers.
Yeah, only one person answers 45 seconds. Go.
Okay, so Seth, you took money from Highland Ventures and you kind of closed with saying if you can take money from a big venture fund, a couple $1 billion fund, you're taking like, I don't know, 250 or 500K from a couple $1 billion fund, that's a good way to go. But there's a whole other side to this where if you're putting yourself in a position where if Highland isn't interested or potentially one partner at that firm isn't interested in doing a follow-on round, then it can kind of kill your company. And so like, Paul, you guys, as I understand, have a policy where you don't do follow-on rounds like that. If you guys don't mind just talking about that other side of that kind of investment.
Right, well, that's certainly part of the reason we do that is because there is this issue. If you do get one round from a VC and then they don't join in the second round, that sends a pretty negative signal to other VCs because like the people who know you best don't want to invest. And so, right, why Combinator is, we give a small amount of money, but the real value is actually the advice and connections and network and everything else. And so yeah, as part of that, we don't have any follow-on funding activities so that there is no conflict of interest there. There's no negative signal that like, oh, we didn't choose to join in on that round, and we're able to help connect people with the best VCs.
This might help the disc golf gentlemen, but when do you know to look for investors and when do you know to throw your idea on Kickstarter, and what are some pros and cons of each?
So I'll jump in on this one. Start looking for an investor as soon as one of them will give you money. That would be my general advice. There's a continuing trend to bootstrap and to try and not take money, and I'm totally in the opposite camp. If you can get money at good terms, it's going to make your life easier. The help they're going to give you is going to be great. The credibility is awesome, and if you can bootstrap, then take the money and just don't spend it on the things you would have been able to bootstrap. Spend it on something else. So as soon as humanly possible, and start trying right away.
Hi. When you're working nights and weekends and you put in some amount of work, at what point do you worry about not infringing some obscure IP and things like that?
Never. Like, don't waste your time.
Okay.
You are infringing on IP. There's no question.
So let me reiterate, because the gentleman in front of me asked the question about bootstrapping, but that was my question, so I'm going to ask it again. Do we always have to raise money? Because lately there is a trend about bootstrapping. Is it for real, or it was just, a factor of the tough economic times?
I think bootstrapping's for real. As an entrepreneur, look, I think the kind of macro trends out there, you have large cap tech companies like Google, like Microsoft, like Facebook, like Yahoo, who've accumulated a massive amount, Apple, have accumulated a massive amount of cash on their balance sheets. So small acquisitions are things which those companies are likely to continue doing over the next 2-3 years. So bootstrapping really, the benefit of bootstrapping is it allows for relatively small acquisitions where you own a good, the majority of the company to be really beneficial for you and cheap for the company. So they preserve a wide range of early exit options. Taking money definitely narrows range of exit options just because there's a higher hurdle now that you have to be bought at. So I'm still a big fan of bootstrapping as an investor because it lowers the risk of the investor investing because you usually have more data to invest on.
Okay, last question over here.
I'm currently looking for one or more co-founders. Right now it's just myself. And to be brutally honest about my skills, I think I excel most at more of a product design, product manager type of role. I do have a technical background and I can do the technical stuff, but I just feel I excel more at designing the product and the features. Do you recommend I look more for a business background, a person with a business background or a technical background?
I think, I mean, it's tricky to find anyone, right? But I think improving your own technical skills is the thing to do right away. And then probably, I mean, it depends what you're building, obviously. Like, it depends on the market. It depends what are the needs that are going to make your business successful, right? But if there is a big technology component, I think it's pretty important that your co-founder also be technical.
Okay, we are out of time. Thank you so much for staying with us, and thank our panel.